Good afternoon, everybody. We will get started. Before we begin with the content today, I want to let you know that Spanish interpretation is available for the meeting this afternoon and evening. You can click the interpretation globe on the Zoom screen at the bottom and select Spanish for Spanish interpretation for the duration of today's meeting. Can you please translate the instructions?
Buenas tardes a todos, gracias por estar aquí. Para informarles que hoy tenemos interpretación disponible. Para acceder a la interpretación, por favor hágale clic al botón que parece un globo y puede darle clic al lenguaje que prefiere, inglés o español. Gracias.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, again. Thank you for being here and welcome to those joining us virtually and those joining us here in the room. For the record, the time is now 4:01 p.m. and we have begun the public workshop on draft health guidance values for the acrolein and ethylene oxide. My name is Jane Harrington from Leading Resources. I am your neutral third-party facilitator for today's workshop. My role is to guide the flow of our meeting, keep us on track, and ensure everyone has a meaningful opportunity to participate. I am not affiliated with OEHHA, CARB, or any community or industry group. I'm just here to support the process. I am joined by my colleague Ronnie Jones, also from Leading Resources, a facilitator who will be monitoring our virtual attendees on the Zoom channel throughout the meeting to make sure we have effective participation there. She will be watching the raise hand queue for virtual participants and also flagging anything that we might need to know from our virtual attendees. For those joining on Zoom, you can use the raised hand feature to participate when we get to the public comment period. When it's your turn, the host will unmute you. Again, Spanish interpretation is available today. You can click on the globe in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen to join the Spanish room. If you are in the room with us today, to prevent echoes in the room, which we seem to be doing okay right now, but in the bottom left-hand corner of Zoom, you can click the audio button and choose Leave Computer Audio to prevent feedback. Today's workshop is being recorded and will be posted to OEHHA's website with all the materials. For those in the room, restrooms are located out the door and to the left, and in an emergency, please leave out the door and exit down the stairs through the front of the building. I will now move to today's workshop goals. We'll go ahead one more slide to the goals for today. There we go. For today's goals, we've got learn about OEHHA's draft inhalation unit risk values for acrolein and ethylene oxide. We'll collect comments on OEHHA's draft IRU documents, and we'll understand CARB's next steps and actions. Before we move into the presentations, let me briefly walk through our community agreements, which are our shared guidelines for today. Our community agreements are to respect all perspectives, share the space, ask questions, focus on understanding, honor lived experience and science, keep comments constructive. And our commitment, we're here to share the information, be accountable, listen, learn, and create a respectful space for meaningful public participation in the scientific review process. With that, I will now turn it over to OEHHA staff, and I will invite them to introduce themselves before they move into their presentations.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paula Torrado Plazas, and I'm the Program Director for the Office of Environmental Health Education Community Engagement and Cumulative Impact Science of OEHA. So here to answer any questions on community concerns and support the team. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Rima Woods, Section Chief for the Air Toxicology and Risk Assessment Section here at OEHA.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meng Song. I am the Air and Site Assessment and Climate Indicators Branch Chief at OEHA. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we walk through the technical aspects of OEHA's 2 draft documents for inhalation unit risk factors, called IURs for short. Again, I'm Dr. Rima Woods, and I'm joined today by Dr. Meng Sun, and we'll be giving the technical presentation. So there are 3 parts to our presentation. First, I'll give you some background on OEHA, so who we are and what programs we work on. I'll also talk about why we developed IURs for both of these chemicals, acrolein and ethylene oxide. Second, I'll talk about what an IUR is and how we use it, and the process we go through to develop one of these IURs. And third, Dr. Sun and I will walk through the draft IUR for acrolein. We'll pause to hear public comments on the technical aspects of the draft IUR document for acrolein before moving on to the technical summary for ethylene oxide. We'll then hear public comments on the draft IUR for ethylene oxide and then conclude our technical presentation. OEHA, short for the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, is the lead state agency for the assessment of health risks posed by environmental hazards. So we're one of 6 boards, departments, and offices under the California Environmental Protection Agency. And under Cal EPA, we work together to develop, implement, and enforce environmental laws that regulate air, water and soil quality, pesticide use, and waste recycling and reduction. Next slide. OEHA works on a wide range of issues, including programs that assess chemicals in drinking water and in air, and that provide information on contaminants in fish. We have CalEnviroScreen, which is a mapping tool that helps identify California communities that are most affected by different sources of pollution, and CalHeatScore, which is a tool that can help people stay informed about risks from extreme heat. Our office manages the Proposition 65 chemical list, and we work with other agencies to measure levels of environmental chemicals in people's bodies through biomonitoring. We work on a wide range of issues, but today we'll be focusing on our work specific to chemicals in the air. Thank you. So OEHA's work on toxic chemicals in the air is mainly done under the Air Toxics Hotspots program. So under this program, CARB identifies chemicals of concern and requires that facilities that release these chemicals into the air must report how much is being released to their local air districts. OEHA works with CARB and air districts to identify chemicals of concern and develops cancer and non-cancer health guidance values for them. We also work with local air districts who use our health guidance values to perform health risk assessments, which determine if chemicals emitted into the air from a facility presents a health risk to nearby communities. The chemicals that are included under the Hotspots program are identified and chosen in a few different ways. They can be chemicals that have high emission levels, meaning a lot of it's released into the air, or they can be chemicals that are suspected or known to be toxic. They can also be chemicals that are a specific concern to local air districts or to local communities. Next slide. And it was community concerns that prompted OEHA to evaluate the cancer health impacts of acrolein. So thank you to communities for organizing and elevating these concerns to us so that we could take action. So a 2015 report from the California Council on Science and Technology highlighted concerns from communities about air quality, stating that communities near oil and gas facilities did not have enough air quality information and that possible health impacts had not been well studied. In 2017, CARB and OEHHA launched the study of neighborhood air near petroleum sources, or SNAPs for short, in response to the continued need to better understand air pollution in some of the most impacted areas in California. The community of Lost Hills was selected as the first study location, and Lost Hills is a small, rural, mostly Latino community in Kern County. So it sits next to one of California's busiest oil fields, and it's surrounded by thousands of active oil and gas wells, farmland, processing plants, and highways. So CARB conducted air monitoring from May 2019 through April 2020 and evaluated over 100 pollutants, including acrolein, to better understand local air quality conditions. The results showed acrolein concentrations in Lost Hills were higher than those measured in other parts of the Central Valley. At the time, acrolein could only be evaluated for non-cancer health impacts because a cancer health guidance value was not available, so cancer risk was not fully characterized. Other work done under the Biomonitoring California program found markers of acrolein exposure in the urine of people they tested in the San Joaquin Valley, further supporting the need to fully understand the toxicity of acrolein. Then in 2021, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, known as IARC, classified acrolein as probably carcinogenic to humans. So that classification, along with the findings from Lost Hills and the biomonitoring results, led OEHHA to begin working on developing a cancer IUR. So today we'll be discussing our work on developing a cancer health guidance value for acrolein. Slide. We will also be discussing our work on developing a health guidance value for ethylene oxide, abbreviated ETO. This chemical has an IUR that was developed in 1987 after it was designated as a toxic air contaminant by the state of California. Toxic air contaminants, or TACs, are air pollutants which may cause or contribute to an increase in mortality or an increase in serious illness, or which may pose a present or potential hazard to human health. Since 1987, new scientific evidence has become available. So US EPA also had a cancer health guidance value for ETO, and this new scientific evidence prompted them to update their value, which was released in 2016. The new evidence, coupled with potentially high exposures to communities near facilities that emit ETO, both here in California and across the country, prompted OEHHA to update our value. So I've told you a bit about who we are, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And now I'll tell you a bit about how we're doing it. So we'll briefly walk through the process of how we develop an IUR. An IUR is a type of health guidance value. And in general, a health guidance value is an exposure level for a chemical below which we don't expect people to have an increased risk of health effects. When OEHHA develops health guidance values, we look at all of the available evidence. We consider both cancer and non-cancer health impacts, and we review data from studies that include both animals and humans. When we're analyzing this data, we incorporate additional factors to make sure that we're protecting everyone in the population, including people who may be more sensitive to the effects of the chemical, like children or people with pre-existing conditions. And we use all of this information to calculate a level against which we can compare a person's exposure. For chemicals in the air, we develop two types of health guidance values. For chemicals that cause cancer, we develop IURs, which are used to estimate the cancer risk that could result from exposure to a concentration of 1 microgram per cubic meter in the air over a lifetime. They help us understand how much a person's cancer risk is increased if they are exposed to a chemical long-term over a lifetime. For non-cancer effects of a chemical, we develop reference exposure levels, or RELs. So this is the concentration of a chemical in the air that a person can be exposed to without expecting any adverse health effects. As I mentioned, we build in safety factors to protect sensitive people within the population. RELs are time dependent, so we develop them for acute or short-term exposure, repeated 8-hour exposures, like those that can occur 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for a long period of time, and also for chronic or long-term exposures. And the details of how we develop these health guidance values can be found in our technical guidance documents, which are all posted on our website. So today's focus is on cancer IURs. And as I said on the previous slide, the IURs are used to calculate the potential increase in a person's lifetime risk for developing cancer. It is dependent on them breathing in a certain amount of a chemical continuously for a long period of time. But we can break this down a little bit more. Risk is how likely an outcome is to happen. In this case, it's the likelihood of developing cancer. And it's important to remember that risk does not mean that the outcome will happen. An example is smoking. So we know that smoking can increase a person's risk of developing cancer, but not all people who smoke will go on to develop cancer. The risk we calculate depends on how much of the chemical a person is breathing in and how long they are exposed. So for IURs, we assume that the person, again, is breathing in 1 microgram per cubic meter of the chemical all day, every day for up to 70 years. So the IUR is the starting point for calculating risk. And there are a few other things that we need to consider when doing this calculation. The IUR is how we determine the potency of the chemical. This just means that some chemicals can cause cancer at lower doses than others. We also consider a person's exposure. So what is the actual concentration in the air and how long are they being exposed for? Importantly, we consider that the risk of developing cancer can be higher during certain life stages. So we know that children are more sensitive to cancer-causing chemicals for many reasons. Their bodies are rapidly growing and organs like their lungs and brains are still developing. They have higher breathing rates than adults. All of these reasons make them biologically more susceptible to carcinogens. So we incorporate what we call age sensitivity factors to ensure that children are protected as well. The process to develop an IUR for a chemical can be a lengthy process. Once we've identified a chemical that we need to develop an IUR for, there are 4 main steps that we need to go through before we can start using the IUR in health risk assessments. Next slide. The first step is for OEHHA to assess the information that's available for the chemical. So we need to understand how the chemical gets into the air and what its major uses are, especially in California. We search for and evaluate studies that provide information on the cancer-causing effects of the chemical with a focus on inhalation exposures. So this can include studies in workers who work with or around the chemical, called occupational studies. We can look at lab studies in humans and or animals showing toxic effects. These give us information on what tissues or biological systems are affected and at what doses. We can also look for information, on if the chemical is genotoxic, meaning if it can cause damage to the DNA in our cells, or if it induces other effects that we know are common to carcinogens. Once we've evaluated all of the evidence and have analyzed data from the studies, we can calculate the IUR by following OEHHA's established methodology. Next slide. Great. The second step is the step we're at with Acrolein and ETO. This is the step where we release our draft IUR document for a public comment period. Typically, the public comment period is 45 days long, but can be extended upon request on a case-by-case basis. So during this public comment period, we collect written comments through our website and during in-person and hybrid workshops. We hold at least 2 workshops, one in Northern California and one in Southern California. We post a copy of these PowerPoint slides we're showing today, and at least one of our meetings is recorded and posted to our webpage as well. For the third step, we consider all of the public comments we receive during step 2 and revise our draft IUR document. So the second draft, which we call the SRP draft, is then reviewed by the state's Scientific Review Panel on Toxic Air Contaminants, or SRP for short. So the SRP is made up of 9 experts in various disciplines who are appointed to 3-year terms. The SRP provides a technical review of draft IUR documents. We also include detailed responses for the public comments that we receive. A technical summary is presented to the SRP during another public meeting, and the SRP members provide feedback on the technical aspects of our draft document. And we will then revise the document according to the SRP's recommendations. So when the SRP approves the document, it can then be finalized and we can move on to the fourth and final step in the process. And the last step is to adopt the cancer IUR value into the air toxics hotspots program so that it can then be used in health risk assessments throughout the state. So that's the process that we go through to make sure that the cancer IURs we develop are based on the best available science and have been thoroughly reviewed by both the public and scientific experts before we put them into use. And at this point, we will transition into part 3 of our agenda, the technical summaries of the IUR documents. So now we'll start with the technical summary for the draft cancer IUR for Acrolein. Next slide. So acrolein is a powerful irritant with known non-cancer health effects. In 1989, US EPA added it to their list of hazardous air pollutants, and shortly after, in 1993, CARB identified acrolein as a toxic air contaminant, or TAC. In 2008, OEHHA developed non-cancer RELs for acrolein based on eye irritation and effects on the respiratory system. Then in 2016, the Japan Bioassay Research Center, or JBRC, conducted studies in rats and mice on the carcinogenicity of acrolein. In 2021, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified acrolein as probably carcinogenic to humans. And that brings us to present time with the release of OEHHA's draft cancer IUR for acrolein. And there are currently no other inhalation-based cancer health guidance values at the federal or state level for this chemical. So here we have some information about acrolein, how it's used, and some of the sources of exposure. So it's a colorless to yellowish liquid with an irritating odor. Boiling point is 52 to 53 degrees Celsius or 126 to 127 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. And its vapor pressure is 217 millimeters mercury at room temperature. These characteristics are important because they tell us that acrolein is very volatile, meaning that it evaporates into the air very easily. It can be used as a part of oil and natural gas production and is used in processed water. It's also used to control algae and slime growth and can be used as a disinfectant. So some of the ways that it can get into the air are through burning of fuels and wildfire smoke. It's emitted from oil and gas operations, including refineries, and can be found in the air near some hazardous waste sites. It's a component of cigarette smoke and e-cigarette vapors, so vape pens and the like. It can also be formed from other products in the atmosphere, and it's also found in indoor air from cooking and the heating of oils. So this is just a very brief overview of some of the sources of acrolein. Our CARB colleagues will lead a more in-depth discussion on this topic, as well as some information on the concentration of acrolein in air later in the presentation. So once acrolein gets into the air, it's important to understand how much of it gets into the body and how our body processes it. This is called absorption and metabolism. So overall, acrolein is highly absorbed via inhalation. Up to 98% of acrolein from the air is absorbed in the upper respiratory tract. Compared to rodents, which only breathe through their noses and so absorb acrolein only in the upper respiratory tract, acrolein can also get into the lower respiratory tract in humans because we also breathe through our mouths. In humans, acrolein is predominantly metabolized by glutathione, which is an antioxidant found in the cells of most living organisms. The metabolites are eliminated from the body in the urine with a half-life of between 8 to 12 hours, and that's after oral exposure. So this means that after 24 hours, most of the acrolein will have been removed from the body through urinary excretion. And the body can produce small amounts of acrolein, and we call this endogenous production, meaning from within the body. So endogenous production can happen during normal biological processes like lipid peroxidation or metabolism of some amino acids. So now that we have some background on acrolein, I'll turn it over to Dr. Sun to walk us through the evidence that acrolein causes cancer and how we use that information to derive a draft IUR.
Slide, please. Thank you, Dr. Woods. As she has mentioned earlier, in 2021, IARC classified acrolein as probably carcinogenic to humans. This classification was based on scientific evidence, sufficient evidence in experimental animals, and strong evidence that acrolein exhibits multiple key characteristics of carcinogens, or KCs. I will explain the KCs on the next slide. In cancer studies in rodents, acrolein caused tumors in the nasal cavity, uterus, and lymph nodes. While IARC considered the human evidence for acrolein's carcinogenicity inadequate, OEHHA still reviewed cancer studies of acrolein in humans. None of the available human studies provided information needed to conduct dose-response assessment, or in other words, to develop an IUR. Therefore, the acrolein IUR is developed based on animal studies. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of available mechanistic information of acrolein as reviewed by IARC. They use the key characteristics of carcinogens, or the KCs framework. The 10 KCs were originally identified by a comprehensive review of over 100 human carcinogens. They are helpful to organize mechanistic events that are relevant in the multi-stage process of carcinogenesis and provide biological plausibility. The IARC evaluation found that acrolein exhibits multiple KCs, including KC1 is electrophilic. This means acrolein can attack DNA and protein and form adducts. Studies in humans have observed that the formation of acrolein DNA adducts can happen in oral buccal cells of smokers and users of e-cigarette. KC2 is genotoxic. Specifically, acrolein exposure led to DNA strand breaks, mutations, and chromosomal damage in multiple types of human cells. In the interest of time, I will just name the other KCs that acrolein has evidence for. They are KC3 alters DNA repair or causes genomic instability. KC5 induces oxidative stress. KC6 induces chronic inflammation. KC7 is immunosuppressive, and KC10 alters cell proliferation, cell death, or nutrient supply. Taken together, these mechanistic data form strong support for identifying acrolein as a probable human carcinogen. Next slide. Now we will discuss the rodent carcinogenicity studies. OEHHA reviewed 2 sets of inhalation studies in animals. First study is Matsumoto et al. 2021, which are 2-year inhalation studies conducted by the Japan Bioassay Research Center, or JBRC, in male and female rats and mice. In these studies, 50 animals per group per sex were exposed to acrolein for 6 hours per day, 5 days a week, for up to 104 weeks. The second set of studies by Ferrin and Crusay were 52-week studies where 18 hamsters per group per sex were exposed to a single concentration of acrolein for 7 hours per day, 5 days per week. This set of studies also included other treatment groups with both acrolein exposure and other carcinogens. Since this study tested a single concentration of acrolein and found no acrolein-related tumors, we will focus the presentation on the Japanese study. Next. The Matsumoto study reported increased tumors with acrolein treatment in female rats and female mice. No statistically significant tumor findings were noted in male rats or male mice. In the female rats, there were increases in 2 types of rare nasal cavity tumors, namely the squamous cell carcinoma, which is a cancer of cells that line the surface of the nasal cavity, and rhabdomyoma, which is a benign, rare tumor made of muscle cells. In the female mice, there were increases in 3 types of tumors from 3 tissues. These include adenoma of the nasal cavity, which are rare, benign gland-type tumors that grow inside the nose. The second type is histiocytic sarcomas of the uterus. Histiocytic sarcomas are rare cancers of a type of immune cells and can spread to multiple organs. And the last tumor type is malignant lymphoma of the lymph nodes. For detailed tumor incidences, please see Table 1 and Table 2 of the IUR document. Now that we've identified the increased tumors, the next step in IUR derivation is to determine which tumors are modeled and how they're modeled. For female rats, OEHHA modeled the combined incidences of rhabdomyomas and nasal squamous cell carcinomas in female rats, as they were both tumors of the nasal cavity. For female mice, OEHHA modeled the incidences of nasal cavity adenomas and malignant lymphomas of the lymph nodes. The histiocytic sarcomas of the uterus were not included in the modeling because there is a lack of clear dose response. The increase in the mid-dose was considered may have been related to Acrolein by IARC. The next step in deriving the IUR is to calculate the lifetime average daily doses. These dose calculations are needed because cancer risk estimation assumes linearity at low dose, meaning that cancer risk increases in direct linear proportion to the long-term average daily dose of the chemical. Using the chamber concentrations of acrolein in these studies, shown in the middle column of the table, we first use the top equation shown on the slide to calculate the C. The C is the time-adjusted average concentration. This adjustment is needed because the animals were only exposed for 6 hours in a 24-hour day and 5 out of 7 days in a week. Then, species-specific inhalation rates and body weight were used to calculate the lifetime average daily dose. This table shows the results of the calculations in the right column. These values are in units of milligram per kilogram body weight per day, and they were used in the dose response modeling. As I just mentioned, cancer risk estimation assumes linearity at low dose. This means that the cancer slope factor may be obtained by linear extrapolation from an appropriate benchmark dose. For Acrolein, we used the multi-stage cancer model in US EPA's benchmark dose software. The benchmark dose, or BMD, was calculated using the benchmark response, or BMR, of 5%. The cancer slope factor is calculated by dividing the BMR by the BMDL, which is the 95% lower confidence bound of the BMD. For the female mouse study, since there were multiple tumors from different tissues, we used the multi-site tumor analysis function in BMDS to derive the combined cancer slope factor. The animal cancer slope factor then is converted to the human cancer slope factor to account for pharmacokinetic differences between humans and rodents. Pharmacokinetics means how the chemical moves through the body. The conversion also accounts for pharmacodynamic considerations. Pharmacodynamics means how the chemical affects the body. This adjustment is done by applying an interspecies scaling factor, which is the ratio of human to animal body weights raised to the 1/4 power. This table shows the BMDS dose response modeling results and cancer slope factors. Based on these results, the multi-site CSF in female mice, shown in the bottom right cell, was chosen by OEHHA to be the critical data set to derive the IUR. The last step includes calculation of IUR from the CSF human. As mentioned before, cancer slope factor and the IUR are both measurements of unit or incremental cancer risk. They both measure unit risk increase with 70 years of inhalation exposure to a defined level of the chemical. While the IUR defines the exposure as 1 microgram per cubic meter, the CSF defines the exposure as 1 milligram per kilogram body weight per day. The IUR can be calculated by multiplying the CSF human by the breathing rate of 20 cubic meters per day and dividing the results by the body weight, which is 70 kilograms, and conversion factor from milligram to microgram. The draft IUR for Acrolein is calculated to be 7.9 times 10 to the -4 per microgram per cubic meter. This concludes OEHHA's presentation on the IUR for Acrolein, and now I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Woods.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sun, for the summary of the technical work done on the IUR for Acrolein. So as I mentioned much earlier in the presentation, we are on the second step of the IUR process, the public comment step. So we've extended our public comment period and we'll be accepting comments on our draft technical document until July 29th. The best way to submit comments is through OEHHA's online portal at the website shown here, oehha.ca.gov/comments. And you can also send your comments directly to me at my email address shown here at rima.woods@oehha.ca.gov. And of course, we're looking forward to collecting oral comments at today's meeting. And so with that, I will hand it back to Jane.
Thank you. We will now open for public comment period on OEHHA's draft IUR for Acrolein. If you'd like to make a public comment, please step to the podium, or if you're attending virtually, please raise your hand. We will call on commenters in the order that the hands were raised or that they stepped to the podium. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes so that we can hear from as many people as possible. We invite you to state your name and affiliation before speaking. Comments during this public comment period should relate specifically to Acrolein IUR. We invite you to reserve other public comments for the general public comment period towards the end of the meeting or the other topics on today's agenda. While the purpose of the comment period is to get input, if there are basic questions that can be answered by staff, they will do their best to answer those today. Otherwise, they will follow up with you. We will go ahead and open that comment period. For those on Zoom, please raise your hand. Noting for the record, we have about 120 virtual attendees at this point of the meeting. Looking to the room and seeing no one at the podium, we will shift virtually. We'll come back to you. We'll shift virtually now. And Lost Hills, it looks like we see your hand raised. You should be unmuted on our end. You might need to unmute on yours. Please go ahead.
Buenas tardes. Tenemos 7 personas preparados a hablar. ¿Podríamos hacer eso?
Sí, claro que sí.
Porque es todo un comité.
Está bien, gracias. ¿Cuántas personas están ahí para poder interpretarlos?
Pero ¿es algo que podrían contestar, por favor?
Disculpa, ¿puedes repetir?
Están haciendo- no, si quieres comentar. Todavía. Creo que ahorita no.
Discúlpame, Jesús, ¿estás ahí? ¿Me escuchas?
Sí,
¿Me escuchas, Jesús?
sí, aquí. Sí, ahora sí.
Ok. ¿Quieres hacer los comentarios públicos en este mismo Zoom o...?
Sí, ¿me puede escuchar? Sí, por favor. Ahorita aquí tenemos 7 personas para hacer comentarios.
Ok.
Ok, entonces se lo voy a pasar a la primera persona.
Sí, está bien. Me dice cuando comienzo.
No.
Un momento, Jesús. For folks in English, can you please press the interpretation globe and press English so you can get interpreted? And folks on the room, there's
Sí,
interpretation
mi nombre
devices
es
if you
Saúl
wanna.
Ruiz,
Un momentito.
vivo en la
Jesús, dame un
comunidad de
segundo.
Los Gil, tengo 40 años viviendo aquí en la comunidad y ok.
Thank you for the patience, folks in the room, that we have community members that like to testify for the public comments in Spanish. So there are interpretation devices. We have interpreters here in terms of language justice. If you could pick up an interpretation device in the back. So our interpreters will interpret it in English. So for those in the room, you can do that. And for those online, you can go ahead and click in the globe and press the English language. Thank you for making accommodations as we make this space as accessible as possible for everyone.
I'm sorry, we have to repeat what you say, but otherwise they cannot hear you because
Okay.
they only hear the interpretation. But when they start,
Ok,
I will
gracias.
do the interpretation. Just in case. Puede empezar.
Thank you, everyone.
Señor Jesús, puede empezar.
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Saúl Ruiz. Vivo en la comunidad de Los Gil por 40 años. Cuando llegué
Hi,
a este país, yo aquí formé mi familia y descubrí un problema en una de mis hijas, la hija mayor, que tenía asma y se nos moría en los brazos. Y, y he estado siguiendo trabajando con personas así sobre el medio ambiente, los problemas de los campos de petróleo, los pesticidas. Y miro que ahora actualmente está subiendo mucho el nivel de la acrolina aquí en mi comunidad. Hay olores muy fuertes, muy feos, se los reportamos al Distrito del Aire y pues siendo una agencia gubernamental no veo la solución que ellos hacen a nuestro problema. Y pues pienso que el problema viene por los campos de petróleo y compañías grandes que han puesto aquí en el área de los ocios, como viene siendo Wanderpool y la Callaway, y un vertidero de desperdicios que traen de Los Ángeles y hay otras compañías que están causando daño aquí a mi comunidad y hay mucho problema, todo lo que dijeron en la
Sí,
junta ahorita, lo que está pasando en la Acrolein, pues todas las personas de avanzada edad están teniendo el problema en los ojos, en la respiración, en las personas que tienen asma, en los oídos. Yo he tenido problemas en los oídos, en el oído derecho. Yo ya tengo 2 operaciones y pues nadie da respuesta a cuál es el problema y mirando todo lo que está pasando a causa de la acrolina, pues miro que eso es lo que está pasando en mi comunidad y
señor
pues
Jesús,
no hay agencias que nos puedan ayudar. Como es el Distrito del Aire, hacemos el reporte, ellos dicen que vienen y que no encontraron nada y nosotros seguimos con el mismo problema. Y yo quisiera pedirles ahorita a ustedes que como agencias gubernamentales hagan saber a la comunidad por medio de correo, llamadas por teléfono, que el nivel de acrolina está muy alto en la comunidad de Los Gil para que podamos saber cada persona porque les hablamos a las personas, pero en realidad pues no quieren tomar el caso. Ha habido muchas muertes de cáncer en el 2017. Yo tuve que hablar con el gobernador y pedirle y mandó SNAP aquí a nuestra comunidad,
Señor
pero
Jesús,
también tardamos como 4 o 5 años para recibir la respuesta y cuando nos dan la respuesta sale que el problema es bastante fuerte.
No, oye,
no,
Tenemos el derecho como seres humanos
I don't think
que
he had
seamos
his,
tratados no como las ratas con que hacen los experimentos. Nosotros somos personas humanas, tenemos familia, los hijos y la
Señor
juventud
Jesús,
del futuro,
Señor
pues va a
Jesús,
estar demasiado dañada al problema, porque ahorita en el estándar que se puso fue 6 veces más alto de otros niveles del nivel de la acrolina. Queremos que el Estado se haga responsable de enviar
Señor
correos,
Jesús, Señor Jesús,
¿sí?
necesitamos que usted pare para poder hacer la interpretación. Y aparte, usted ya pasó los 2 minutos.
Ok, está bien, gracias.
Permítame.
¿Ya se lo puedo pasar a otra persona?
No, necesitamos interpretar esto al inglés.
Okay.
¿Los de aquí también? Ok, then the next one can I start? The next person, they are 7.
Nos va a dejar saber ahorita.
¿Puede iniciar el siguiente?
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Irma Medina de Ruiz y yo vivo aquí en la comunidad de Los Gil por 35 años. Aquí también tengo mi familia y tengo 9 hijos y yo estoy mirando este problema ahorita últimamente estos años. Pues la Carolina pues salió muy alta en estos estudios que nos hicieron de los snacks. Pues eso fue lo que salió, arrojó, ¿verdad? El estudio. Y pues ahorita que está 10 veces más alta de lo normal. Y pues yo quiero a ver si por favor pueden hacer algo por nosotros, por la comunidad, a ver de qué manera podemos, pues que ya ese problema de la Carolina no esté tan alto aquí para nosotros, para nuestros hijos y para toda la comunidad de aquí. Y pues eso es lo que yo les quiero pedir, por favor, porque pues sí hay mucho cáncer aquí en la comunidad, mucha gente que está resultando con cáncer y muriendo de cáncer. Gracias, esto es todo lo que quiero decir.
Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es María Rosario Molina de Bajano y me he estado dando cuenta con el problema que se está llevando acá, ¿verdad? Que hace algunos años se llevó un estudio. Colaboré con la señora Roxana, pero de eso no sé, no supe qué pasó después porque no dieron un resultado de los estudios que se habían hecho. Entonces, se llevó a cabo el problema porque también en ese entonces y hace poco yo sentí que en el agua, como que me quedé así con una desesperación que como que no podía respirar, ¿verdad? Y ahora me doy cuenta que es por el problema de la Acrolein. Entonces, y por ahora también, a mí los ojos me arden demasiado y cuando acuerdo están mis lágrimas, así que se vienen de la misma cosa de lo que siento. Involuntariamente, ¿verdad? Me salen las lágrimas. Entonces yo soy testigo testigo de esta situación que estamos pasando por ahorita. Y pues sí nos interesa bastante que se pueda dar una solución, porque nosotros pues queremos que tomen en cuenta la situación que está pasando aquí en Locio, ¿verdad? Entonces por eso estamos reuniéndonos, y ahora que el Señor Jesús nos puso allí el estudio que han hecho, vemos la importancia que sí necesitamos nosotros ayuda también. Bueno, eso es todo y muchas gracias.
Soy Donaldo Majano, residente de Los Hills. Estaba viendo el panorama de todos los estudios que han hecho a la comunidad, pero la comunidad no ha tenido ningún documento de respuesta a los estudios que hicieron. Entonces, prácticamente como que nos sentimos olvidados, nos dan esos estudios que los han hecho y no tenemos ningún resultado. Y queremos que tomen cartas en el asunto para solucionarnos este problema. En mi opinión sería de que la monitoreen más a menudo, más seguido, porque vienen un año, hacen un estudio y la respuesta la tenemos a los 2, 3, 4, 5 años. Pues ya estamos contagiados ya estamos enfermos de cáncer, unos están próximos a enfermarse, otros son sobrevivientes, debido a que no ponen cartas en el asunto. Sí, le rogamos como habitante de esta comunidad, por favor, de que tomen cartas en el asunto y monitoreen más de cerca el problema del acroline. Por favor, les agradeceremos mucho.
Sí, soy Ana María Díaz. Mire, ya tengo aquí 46 años aquí en este pueblo y pues estamos con el mismo problema de pues preocupados porque pues no se le ve solución a esto, ¿verdad? Y cada vez está más elevado todo esto. Mi esposo murió de cáncer, yo soy sobreviviente de cáncer y muchas personas de este pueblo se están enfermando de cáncer. Entonces, ahora sí que pues yo pido de favor que nos escuchen por la juventud, por los niños, y nadie se quiere morir a pesar de que estemos grandes. Nadie queremos morir, y menos de esa enfermedad tan horrible que es tan destructiva. Entonces, yo creo que nadie quiere morirse de eso. Y las personas, digo, que están lejos, no les interesa, pero los que estamos aquí sí nos interesa y que pedimos ayuda, queremos saber por qué esos olores y que no se les da respuesta a esos olores y que nomás dicen que cuando llegan que ya no hay. Entonces, ¿cómo está eso? ¿Por qué de repente temprano se huele muy feo y ya después llegan los inspectores y no encuentran nada? Y eso nos sentimos mal nosotros, como si nos estuvieran diciendo que somos mentirosos o algo así. Me siento mal porque yo digo, yo reporto, pero no, pues no hay respuesta a eso. Es todo lo que puedo decir.
Quedan dos.
Hello, my name is Saul Reese Medina Jr. I live here in Los Hills, California for about 20 years. I've seen a lot of stuff going on with the air. My dad has been in the program and committee of Los Hills for over 30 years. We found out that the Acrolein has been increased and it's messing with our community, with our older people and little kids. general. I see a lot of people with asthma and cancer around here having struggle breathing. And I just want to I just want to know that I feel like my community is not seen or heard when it comes to the district of the air. What I would like for you guys to do, set up a station or a spot where could be 24-hour surveillance of the air here in Lost Hills. Because we smell it more than half of the day, and us living here in the Central Valley is like it's like being in the gas chambers, you know, like that's what it's like you can't breathe. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'll do mine in English. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesus Alonso. I'm the current community organizer for Clean Water Action, and I've been working with the community members of Lost Hills since 2016, 2017. First, I really want to thank OEHHA and CARB for listening to the community and conducting monitoring in the community that has essentially brought us here today. Finally getting an answer to some of the questions community members have had for a long time. I believe that the next step should be, as we've started with agencies and community working together to address the impacts of these contaminants. We ask that CARB and OEHHA continue to support the community through constant monitoring and oversight of the reduction efforts in the community, and for the Air District to enforce and implement emission reduction efforts. As you guys have heard, cancer is very prominent in the community and has long impacted the community. So a few thoughts on the prevention and reduction would be combining and implementing the Air District's Clean Air Center and Clean Room program for community members. That would partner well with a notification system from, like was mentioned before, an ongoing monitoring program that alerts community members of increased levels of contaminants, especially acrolein. As we saw in SNAPs, acrolein was found at higher levels in Lost Hills than other communities, and that has been extremely concerning since we've all discovered that. Additionally, Lost Hills has an emission reduction plan, and we hope to get support and guidance from local agencies in order to help implement that, which we believe will help reduce the emissions in our community. Thank you.
Jesús, Comité de los Hills en acción, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Saúl, a Donaldo, María Rosario, Ana María, Saúl Adoldano, todas muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Reconocemos sus experiencias y las tenemos en cuenta y como parte de nuestros talleres de comunitarios vamos a hacer una reunión en los Hills muy prontamente para que podamos informarlos más y que estén más involucrados en el proceso de decisiones y lo que sigue después de estos talleres públicos. Estamos agradecidos por su tiempo, sé que toma parte de su día después de su trabajo, así que lo agradecemos mucho. And I'll pass it to CARB if you want to add something. Did you want to? Okay, gracias. Okay.
Thank you. We will continue public comment. So looking to the podium, if you'd like to make a public comment and you're in the room, please step to the podium. Thank you. Looking to the podium, I'll turn it over to you.
Bill McGavin with the Coalition for Clean Air. It's good to see that CARB and OEHHA are engaged in this process and trying to get the best possible scientific information the estimated cancer risk levels that you found are really alarmingly high. And you've heard from people in the Lost Hills community who clearly are suffering and asking for help. I know that there's some money moving through the budget process to provide the resources to continue this work. So we urge you to continue, make sure you're getting the best scientific information, but also make sure that you're moving forward so that before too long, CARB can devise control strategies and implement those in cooperation with the air districts so that we're no longer exposing people to this kind of hazard. Thank you.
Herman Barahona.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Germán Barahona. I'm the Executive Director of the Sacramento Environmental Justice Coalition. Our organization is made up of faith-based institutions, nonprofits, public health nonprofit organizations, and civic groups across Solano, Placer, Yolo, and Sacramento counties. I am very humbled to hear the stories from our folks in Lost Hills. We have concerns about acrolein here in Sacramento, but our sources are mainly through consumption. And in contrast, of course, in Lost Hills, is they have a heavy burden of production. So we stand in solidarity with the folks in Lost Hills, and we hope to be helpful and supportive in any way possible. I also want to thank the OEHHA staff. We have learned so much from you in the Calenviro screen, and I want to affirm our commitment to create more awareness in our marginalized communities, especially in this area of Sacramento, which doesn't have a heavy presence of environmental justice groups, but we are learning that our central distribution hubs, our Chevron terminal on Front Street, Buckeye terminal on West Sac, and the Kinder Morgan terminal in Chico are of concern, and we want to hopefully learn from you how these sources affect our communities and what we can do about it. Thank you very much for your time.
Mary Elizabeth.
Thank you. Mary Elizabeth, I'm over here in Stockton, and I was also touched by the participation and the outreach that was done in the community by OEHHA. I have great respect for OEHHA. I think that they did bring up a really important point is, like once the study is done, sometimes there's a long time before there's any feedback given to the community about what they might be able to do in the meantime while these rules are being developed. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is the issue about tobacco smoke and the vape smoking, and that the state of California allows for smoking lounges where employees are working. And I think that, that's something that as this rule is being further considered, might add to all of the cumulative cancerous effects related to tobacco smoke so that, we're not looking at these individual contaminants isolated. Another thing is here in Stockton, we have parts of our town where residents are regularly exposed to burns, whether it be for clearing material, getting rid of junk, warming, cooking, and the burning of plastic. And I've asked that the fire department, get involved. a little bit with helping to notify the community and to make sure, that there is, we talk about wildfires, but, we have parts of our communities that are regularly exposed to the hazards, pollutant hazards related to just burning of trash. And so I'd like, to see
2
some
minutes.
work on that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Continuing virtually, Barry, we see your hand raised. You should be unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Barry F. Boyd, board member, and, the Clean Air Chair for the Sacramento Environmental Justice Coalition. That's sac-ejc.org. And we do appreciate CARB bringing forward this opportunity for the community to speak on this matter. And as we're hearing how widespread this issue is here in the state of California, focusing, i.e. California, because of this meeting, to that, under the SMMI, the State Mobile Monitoring Initiative that took place, it was unfortunate that the lab that is going through the data collected wasn't prepared or is unable to measure ETO, and the limited monitoring of Acrolein that took place through the SMMI California citizens would have benefited greatly if that opportunity for ETO would have been measured and a laboratory set up that would be able to process such collected data. With that said, we would like to see further monitoring of ETO statewide, funded by CARB, so that what the stories that you're hearing from real life experiences can translate to data points that can be brought forward to clean up, mitigate, stop the polluting of those ETOs and acroleins in our communities. And as you heard, most assuredly, it always happens to us here in disadvantaged communities. Thank you.
Matt Holmes.
Hi, I'm Matt Holmes, California Environmental Justice Coalition. I just want to thank CARB and thank OEHHA for working together on this and getting out with some really shocking results. This is a frightening toxin. It's clearly got lots of sources of production. I think we heard a really high level description of all the different places that we can be exposed to acrolein and generate acrolein. But I think it's also clear that there's some high profile polluters, that there are big baddies out there, and that we should be moving to enhance monitoring and reporting around major facilities, particularly like landfills and refineries. This is yet another criteria for interrogating permits, particularly permits that are operating on administrative extensions. So I hope we're able to move with speed to try to protect as many households as possible from this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Looking virtually, noting for the record, we have about 115 virtual attendees at this point. Looking to the room and seeing no one at the podium. Give it just a moment. That concludes public comment on this item.
Thank you. Thank you, Herman, Bill, Mary, Barry, and Matt for showing up and giving public comments. We acknowledge your participation, and thank you for acknowledging that CARB and OEHHA are working together on this and that much more is coming. Wanted to acknowledge your participation. Thank you.
Thank you again. And reminding everybody that written comments may also be submitted through July 29th, 2026 at oeha.ca.gov/comments, which is noted on today's agenda. With that, we'll now move directly to our ETO technical presentation. Rima and Mung, the floor is yours. I got ahead of myself. Let's take a 5-minute break. The time is now 5:10. We will return at 5:16. Thank you. Somebody really else. Right downtown, right? Yeah, that's what I expect. Well, I don't. Maybe. Okay, you don't touch it. Message from Bert today. How much do they got on that? Yeah. We're not trying to budget science, it's close later. The whole solution also, it's not. Yeah, so it's some weird. I mean, I wouldn't expect much trouble. No. Yeah. All right, let's reconvene. Thank you. The time is now 5:16, and we will continue our public workshop on draft health guidance values for acrolein and ethylene oxide. I will turn it back over to OEHA to do their presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So thanks everyone for staying with us. Now we're going to walk through the technical summary of the draft IUR for our second chemical of today, ETO. So ETO is an irritant and a reproductive and developmental toxicant, in addition to being a known carcinogen. And as I covered earlier in the presentation, ETO has an IUR that was developed by OEHHA in 1987. And at that time, the IUR was based on animal cancer data. US EPA developed an IUR for ETO based on newer data from human occupational studies. So OEHHA leveraged the work done by US EPA to start the process of updating our IUR for ETO. In 2022, we presented this approach of leveraging US EPA's work as a starting point for our update to the SRP, who provided positive feedback. Then in 2023, we released a draft updated IUR document. And in early 2024, we presented our draft to the SRP for initial input. This was not a full SRP review of the draft, but rather a presentation of the 2023 draft, along with technical issues brought up during public comments. And the SRP provided initial input that we used to revise the draft, and we also considered the public comments we received and discussions we've had with interested parties, and incorporated newly available scientific evidence. So ethylene oxide is a well-established carcinogen, and OEHHA's predecessor, the California Department of Health Services, listed ethylene oxide as a Proposition 65 carcinogen back in 1987. Ethylene oxide was also classified as carcinogenic to humans in 2012 by IARC in their most recent review of the chemical, and in 2016 by US EPA. Then in 2021, the National Toxicology Program, or NTP, classified it as known to be a human carcinogen. Next slide. So here we have some background information on ETO. First, it's a colorless gas with a sweet ether-like odor. The boiling point is 51 degrees Celsius or 124 degrees Fahrenheit, and the vapor pressure is 1,095 millimeter mercury. So again, a very volatile chemical that evaporates into the air very easily. Ethylene oxide has several uses, and in California, it's mainly used to sterilize medical and lab equipment. It kills bacteria and viruses at low temperatures, so it's used for items that can't be sterilized using steam or radiation or other methods. It's also used as an intermediate when making other chemicals or industrial products. And it can be used to fumigate agricultural products like herbs and spices. ETO is a product of burning fuel and is detectable in wildfire smoke. It's found in cigarette smoke and e-cigarettes or vapes, and it can also be released from mobile sources like vehicles and aircraft. So ETO is detectable in ambient air, and it's produced in small amounts by plants and vegetation. And a bit later in the presentation, our colleagues from CARB will discuss more about emission sources of ETO and concentrations of ETO in the air. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, OEHHA chose to update the 1987 ETO IUR by leveraging the work already completed by US EPA and other health agencies. In 2016, the US EPA assessment exhaustively reviewed the available literature since 1987, and OEHHA used that as a starting point for our update. We then performed a focused systematic literature search to identify studies published since US EPA's 2016 assessment. We thoroughly evaluated the new studies, as well as US EPA's approach, models, and endpoints during our assessment. OEHHA used the best available science to derive a draft updated IUR for ETO, and we'll walk through our efforts in the upcoming slides. So first we'll talk about absorption and metabolism, ETO, which has been well studied. It's readily absorbed through the respiratory tract and is highly soluble in blood. And the amount absorbed can depend on how much air is breathed in and how much ETO is in the air. It's distributed rapidly throughout the body and can bind to proteins such as hemoglobin and also to DNA. So there are two major ways that the body metabolizes ETO. The first is through hydrolysis, which leads to the formation of ethylene glycol. This accounts for up to 80% of metabolism in humans, compared to 40% or less in rats and mice. And the second way the body can metabolize ETO is through glutathione, so that antioxidant that's found in most cells. Radiolabel studies have shown that 59% is eliminated through urine and 13% is exhaled in breath. The half-life in blood is about 40 minutes in humans, and elimination is faster in rats and mice as compared to humans. We also know that ETO can be produced in small amounts by natural processes in the body. Endogenous ETO can be produced from the conversion of ethylene, which is another endogenous chemical. Next slide. So as I said, ETO is produced endogenously within the body by normal biological processes, and it can be produced from ethylene. So ETO can attack hemoglobin and form adducts, and hemoglobin is the protein in red blood cells that's responsible for carrying oxygen. Ethylene can be produced endogenously from the breakdown of the amino acid methionine or the breakdown of hemoglobin. Ethylene can also be produced by the breakdown of fatty acids, and it can be produced by bacteria in the intestinal tract. So just as a reminder that ETO can be produced from ethylene. So there is some exposure to ETO that's formed endogenously from ethylene, which is separate from exposure due to external sources like ETO in the air. It's not known how much of the endogenously produced ethylene is converted to ETO, but we do know that about 3% of exogenous ethylene, which comes from outside the body, is converted to ethylene oxide. Next slide. ETO is a known genotoxic chemical. Genotoxicity, as I mentioned earlier, is the ability of a chemical or physical agent to damage the DNA in a cell. Genotoxicity studies of ethylene oxide have been extensively reviewed by OEHHA, US EPA, IARC, and ATSDR, or the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. These studies were conducted in humans, in isolated human cells, and in animals. And in US EPA's 2016 report, they summarized numerous papers investigating the genotoxicity of ETO and concluded that there's clear evidence that ETO is genotoxic and sufficient evidence to show that ETO causes cancer by mutating or permanently altering an organism's DNA. In IARC's most recent monograph from 2012, they concluded that there is strong evidence that ETO is genotoxic, and it consistently acts as a mutagen and clastogen, meaning that it causes breaks in chromosomes, which are packages of DNA in cells. ATSDR's 2022 toxicological profile reiterated findings from US EPA and IARC, concluding that ETO has been demonstrated to be genotoxic in human and animal studies, and in a wide variety of test systems that use isolated cells. In our review of the ETO literature, OEHHA identified 3 genotoxic studies published since US EPA's 2016 review, with 2 studies in humans and 1 in mice. The findings from these 3 newer studies are consistent with the overall evidence for the genotoxicity of ETO. And so now I'll turn it over to Dr. Sun to tell us more about the literature search OEHHA conducted and the scientific evidence we used to derive a draft updated IUR for ETO.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. As Dr. Woods mentioned, OEHHA used the US EPA 2016 IRIS assessment as the primary source of studies published before 2016 and updated the literature search to identify more recent studies relevant for developing the IUR. OEHHA performed 2 separate literature searches, one for studies in humans and the other for animal cancer studies. Detailed literature search strategy and search terms are included in the IR document. We developed PICO criteria for screening the studies. P stands for population, who or what is being studied. For example, adult humans, specific animal models, or a specific demographic group. E stands for exposure, what environmental, chemical, or physical factor are they exposed to? In this case, it's ethylene oxide. C stands for comparator. What is the baseline or control group being compared against? And O stands for outcome. What health effect or result is being measured? In this case, is cancer. Detailed PICO criteria are included in Chapter 4 of our document. Next slide. This slide shows the process and results of OEHHA's literature search and screening for animal studies. No new animal bioassays published since 2016 were identified. 6 publications went through full text screening, 5 were tagged as supplemental material, and 1 was excluded. All the animal carcinogenicity studies included for IUR development were identified by US EPA 2016. Next. Here are the previously available cancer studies in animals. They were identified and reviewed by OEHHA for their usefulness in developing an IUR. The current OEHHA ETO IUR, developed in 1987, is based on leukemia findings in female rats, seen in one of these studies listed on the slide, namely the Snellings et al. 1984. The detailed information on the tumor incidences from these animal studies and the cancer dose response assessment using such data are included in the IUR document. Since evidence from human epidemiological studies is more relevant and more sensitive, the rest of the presentation will focus on human evidence. This slide summarizes the result of OEHHA's updated literature search on ETO and cancer in humans, covering the period of 2016 to 2026. Again, this is because we relied on US EPA 2016 to identify studies published before then. OEHHA's literature search identified approximately over 1,800 unique studies. After full text screening, 11 studies were found to have met the PICO criteria. These 11 studies include 2 ecological studies, 1 cross-sectional study, and 8 longitudinal cohort studies. Next, please. OEHHA reviewed the US EPA's 2016 assessment and identified 3 sets of studies that provided information useful for cancer dose response assessment. These 3 cohorts are the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health cohort, or the NIOSH cohort, which included over 17,000 workers from 14 U.S. sterilization facilities. The second one is the Union Carbide Corporation cohort, which included over 2,000 male chemical production facility workers. And we have the Swedish cohort, which included over 2,000 medical sterilization workers. These 6 publications underwent detailed study evaluation. We've also considered newly available information from Kelly Reef et al. 2025 on the NIOSH cohort and from Valdez Flores et al. 2025 on the Union Carbide cohort. As a result of our evaluation, the NIOSH retrospective cohort studies of lymphoid cancer mortality and breast cancer incidence were determined to be of high study quality and the most sensitive and valid epidemiological studies for IUR calculations. So the update to the cancer IUR for ETO, OEHHA reviewed and adapted US EPA's quantitative cancer risk assessment. Of the epidemiological studies reviewed by US EPA, OEHHA agrees that the NIOSH study published by Stingland and colleagues in 2003 and 2004 is the best available study for conducting exposure response analysis. Overall, OEHHA found that of all the dose response models evaluated, the 2-piece linear spline model fit the underlying NIOSH data the best. Our updated literature search for studies published after US EPA's 2016 assessment did not identify any additional information that calls for a change to US EPA's IUR. We will briefly discuss the new information later during this presentation. The Steenland et al. Publications are based on the NIOSH cohort and included 17,530 workers from 14 sterilization facilities across 11 states. The NIOSH study had the largest existing cohort of ETO exposed workers, including both men and women, and 461,000 person years of observations. The absence of potential confounding exposures added to the strength of the study. OEHHA deemed this study high quality for several reasons, including the availability of quantitative exposure estimates for individual workers, the large cohort size, the inclusion of women, the multiple study locations, and the absence of confounding co-exposures. OEHHA scientists conducted study quality evaluation using a variety of risk bias and study evaluation tools. Detailed study evaluation guidance, process, and results of the 3 occupational cohorts can be found in Figure 3 and attachments C, D, and E of the draft IUR document. Now we will introduce the NIOSH study in a bit more details. The workers included in this study were involved in sterilizing medical supplies, treating spices, and manufacturing and testing medical sterilizers. Lymphoid cancer mortality, including non-Hodgkin lymphoma, myeloma, and lymphocytic leukemia, was assessed in male and females, as well as breast cancer incidence in females. The cohort included all employees who worked at one of the facilities for at least 3 months for lymphoid cancer and at least 12 months for breast cancer. Workplace air measurements were taken between 1976 and 1985 from different sterilizer facilities and included 2,700 time-weighted personal breathing zone exposure values from workers. Each participant's exposure was estimated using a validated multiple regression model that incorporated information on workplace air measurements, sterilization unit size, engineering controls, timing of sterilization, and other parameters. The study had the longitudinal follow-up of lymphoid cancer through 1998. And with the newly available Kelly-Reef study, the follow-up period for breast cancer mortality goes through 2021. This makes the average follow-up for lymphoid cancer around 26.8 years, and for breast cancer mortality, 44 years. The unit risk estimates developed by the US EPA are for extra risk, meaning the risk above background. For the calculation of extra risk, we would compare the lifetime risk of developing lymphoid or breast cancer in the exposed population to the lifetime risk of developing the same cancer in the unexposed population. It's the risk in the unexposed population that is considered background risk. These risk estimates are calculated using a life table analysis, which accounts for competing causes of death and the fact that baseline rates of cancers can vary by age. Conversions were made to account for the differences likely to be seen between the occupational exposure estimates used in the NIOSH study and the environmental exposures that are expected to be seen in the general population. For their assessment, US EPA worked with the NIOSH study authors and performed further analysis, including exposure response modeling of the data. That work included performing linear and log linear exposure response modeling, weighted linear regressions of categorical data, and linear regression spline models. Spline models allow the slope to change at one or more points, and these points are called knots. In addition, the analysis examined different lag periods and mathematical transformations of the exposure variables. Of all the models examined, US EPA determined that the 2-piece linear regression spline model with a knot at 1600 ppm days provided the best biologically plausible fit to the data, especially in the lower exposure region, using cumulative exposure and a 15-year exposure lag. OEHHA used publicly available categorical data to independently evaluate several exposure response models, including weighted linear regressions, weighted least squares regressions, and generalized least squares regressions. Overall, OEHHA found that none of the models provided a better fit to the data than the two-piece linear spline model used by the US EPA. This figure is a simplified version of Figure 11 in our draft document, which was adopted from Figure 4.3 from US EPA 2016. It shows the fit of two different models to the NIOSH cohort data for lymphoid cancer mortality. The purple dots represent individual categorical odds ratios. The two models shown are based on individual level data. The red dashed line labeled US EPA OEHHA is the two-piece linear spline model with a knot at 1600 ppm days, and on the graph you can see it is where the slope changes. This model differs from the model selected by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ, who used the Cox proportional hazard model, shown as the solid light blue line at the bottom. You can tell from the figure that the two-piece linear spline model selected by the US EPA and OEHHA corresponds more closely to the categorical results than the TCEQ model. For simplicity of comparison, this figure does not display additional models evaluated, but those models are shown in Figure 11 in our document. At lower exposures, the TCEQ model dramatically underestimates risks compared to the categorical results and all the other better fitting models. Since the goal of the IUR is to estimate risk at lower environmentally relevant levels, the fit in this low dose region is especially important. Our IUR document provides a detailed justification on model selection. The lymphoid cancer IUR was calculated at the lower 95% confidence limit of the exposure concentration, corresponding to an extra risk of 1%, or the LEC01. This was done using a life table analysis, which accounts for the baseline rate of lymphoid cancers and the slope of the lower spline segment below the knot at 1600 ppm days. The analysis resulted in a lymphoid cancer IUR of 5.26 per ppm. You may notice that on previous slides, the data for lymphoid cancer are for mortality rather than incidence. OEHHA and US EPA developed IUR for lymphoid cancer incidence using the assumption that the exposure-response relationship is the same for lymphoid cancer mortality and incidence. In general, cancer incidence is preferred over cancer mortality for IUR calculations because it is usually a more sensitive metric for overall cancer occurrence. For the breast cancer incidence data, US EPA also evaluated the exposure-response relationship using a combination of linear and log linear models using continuous or categorical exposure data, regression splines, models with and without exposure variable transformation, and models using different exposure metrics such as cumulative exposure, exposure duration, average, and peak. US EPA selected the two-piece linear spline model with individual exposure data, cumulative exposure, and a 15-year exposure lag, and the knot at 5,750 ppm days. OEHHA evaluated several other exposure response models, and none of the models resulted in a better fit, especially in the low dose region, than the two-piece linear spline model. A recent 2025 publication by Kelly Reif et al. Described an extended follow-up of breast cancer mortality in this NIOSH cohort. The results from this new publication support previous findings and provide strong supporting evidence that ETO is causally related to breast cancer. However, the Kelly Reif et al. Analysis was not used in the IUR calculations because they focused on breast cancer mortality, and our assessment focused on breast cancer incidence. This is figure 12 from our draft document, adapted from US EPA figure 410, and shows the relative risk estimates for breast cancer incidence from occupational ETO exposures with a 15-year lag. The categorical data are shown by the purple dots. The two-piece linear spline model with a knot at 5,750 ppm days is shown by the black solid line. This model had a low p-value and good visual fit, especially in the lower exposure ranges. US EPA also applied the life table approach to breast cancer incidence to determine risk estimates. Again, the slope of the lower segment of the two-piece spline model was used to determine risk at lower exposures, as estimated by linear extrapolation of the LEC01, which is the lower 95% confidence limit of the exposure concentration corresponding to an actual risk of 1%. The cancer slope of excess relative risk for breast cancer was about 8 times lower than the corresponding slope for lymphoid cancer mortality. The breast cancer IUR was calculated as 1.48 per ppm. US EPA stated that cancer risk estimates are intended to reflect total cancer risk and not site-specific cancer risk. Therefore, an additional calculation was made to estimate the combined risk for lymphoid and breast cancers. Using this approach, a final combined adult-based cancer IUR estimate is 3.0 times 10 to the negative 3 per microgram per cubic meter, or 5.5 times 10 to the negative 3 per ppb. Lymphoid cancer contributed about 75 to 80% of the total risk. This value is compatible with downstream applications of age sensitivity factors and calculations of age group-specific cancer risks. On one of the earlier slides for Acrolein, we have shown you the conversion equation between CSF and IUR, and the corresponding CSF for ETO is 11 per mg per kg per day. OEHHA considered newly available scientific information in deriving the updated draft IUR. Specifically, these 3 publications were carefully considered. The results from the first 2 shown on the slide supported previous published results from the NIOSH and the union carbide cohorts, respectively. We've already discussed Kelly-Reef et al. 2025 briefly. The Valdez-Flores et al. Study is an update to the union carbide cohort and does not fix the major problems within that cohort. Some of the limitations are still valid and listed on the slide. The Picciotto et al. 2026 study is an in-depth study on the healthy worker survivor effect, which is a concept based on findings that long-term workers tend to be healthier than those who leave work early. This paper provides fairly strong evidence that healthy worker survivor effect existed in the NIOSH cohort and likely have biased the risk estimates towards the null and not towards creating false positive associations between ETO and cancer. On this slide, I'd like to talk a bit about the applicability of the ETO IUR regarding ambient and endogenous levels. Here in this figure, we essentially have 3 types of sources for ETO. Within the green box is the exposure to endogenous ETO. In the orange box, we have ambient air concentrations from a combination of possible sources, natural or from human activities. And from to the right of this arrow, we have higher levels that correlates to either occupational exposures, such as in the NIOSH cohort, or emissions from a known point source. For the hotspots program, the ETO IUR is meant to estimate risk levels associated with exposure to ETO emitted by facilities, which would mean exposures higher than this purple dot, or over and above ambient levels. Using the IUR to calculate risks associated with ambient ETO levels implies calculations outside the range covered by the IUR development and leads to uncertainties. This is shown as the dotted purple line within the orange box. This scenario is not unique to ETO, and the linear low-dose extrapolation is supported by US EPA's cancer risk assessment guidelines, especially for a mutagenic carcinogen like ETO. It is assumed that IUR developed from above background levels is applicable in the ambient range. And this is the basis of the cancer risk estimates you will hear from our CARB colleagues later using the IUR and ambient air concentrations. However, we do not apply the IUR further into the endogenous range, and our document lists several reasons for this. First, there are no tenable toxicokinetic models or data to support using the HEV adduct levels to back calculate endogenous equivalent air concentrations of ETO. Second, the ATSDR review concluded that data are not available to demonstrate that background HEV adduct levels in non-smokers are direct indicators of internal endogenous ETO exposures. Last but not least, the contribution of endogenous levels of ETO and other risk factors to the baseline rates of lymphoid and breast cancers is unknown. With that, I'd like to conclude OEHHA's presentation today and then turn it back to Dr. Woods again.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sun, for the summary of the technical work done on the IUR for ETO. So as with Acrolein, we'll be collecting public comments on our draft technical document until July 29th through our online comment submission portal or directly to me. Both of those addresses are listed here on this slide. So we'll open it up for public comment next, but we just want to take a moment to thank everyone for coming and sharing your input and your stories, and to remind you that the next step in the process will be SRP review of our document, and that we plan to keep everyone updated on when that SRP review meeting will happen so that you'll have another opportunity for participation then. I'll turn it back to Jane to start the public comments on ETO.
Thank you. We will now open our public comment period on OEHHA's draft on ETO. Same guidelines. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes or less so we can hear from as many members of the public as possible. We invite you to state your name and affiliation, and please keep your comments specific to the ETO. I will look to the podium, and if you're attending virtually, please raise your hand. Looking to the podium, and I see one person at the podium. Go ahead.
Been a long day, sorry. John Winger here on behalf of AvaMed, the Med Tech Association representing hundreds of companies that develop life-saving and life-enhancing medical technologies for patients in California and around the world. Effective sterilization of medical technology is critical to public health, and ethylene oxide remains an essential infection prevention measure for many devices. ETO sterilized devices can be found in many healthcare procedures, from a standard blood draw during an annual physical to a complex surgical procedure like an open heart surgery. ETO sterilization is crucial for preventing infection in patients. The supply chain underpinning those procedures is vital, and any disruptions could cause delays in care. Medical device sterilization represents a tiny fraction of commercial use of ETO, representing only 0.5% of all commercial use, yet it sterilizes half, or 20 billion, of all medical devices used in the U.S. every day. As the EPA itself has recognized, it is the only effective, viable sterilization method for many medical devices. For these sensitive and intricate devices, there is no existing alternative method for sterilization. ETO allows for the sterilization of many critical medical technologies and devices that otherwise would be destroyed or unsafe by other sterilization methods, as they would not be able to ensure sterilization without affecting the integrity and function of the device. Disruption to critical sterilization of med tech would prevent the use of many life-saving technologies that have advanced medical care over the last 50 years. Our members place the highest priority on the safety of communities, employees, and the millions of patients we serve. We support reasonable, balanced, and scientific-based regulation. At the same time, any regulation approach to ETO must be grounded in the best available science and reflect real-world conditions. Any disruption in the availability of sterile medical devices and supplies could lead to delays in patient care, an outcome disastrous to patient health, the daily practice of medicine, and overall public health. Sterilization capacity is already constrained. An abrupt or infeasible implementation could jeopardize the timely provision of critical medical technologies. So we would urge OEHHA to protect public health by ensuring that any action related to ETO is scientifically sound, practical to implement, and carefully calibrated to avoid unintended disruption to patient access to sterile medical technologies. And we stand ready to continue our engagement on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
On Zoom, we have Herman Barahona.
Yes, thank you. Herman Barahona with the Sacramento Environmental Justice Coalition. When it comes to the ETO business, we are very concerned about the valley effect and cumulative effects of all the sources of ETO in this valley. We are definitely interested in figuring out ways to improve the situation for all families, for public health, and we are not interested in hearing that this will get in the way of public health, because it doesn't make sense that people get sick with breast cancer or Hodgkin's lymphoma or other problems that's listed in your report for the cost for doing business. That's not an acceptable situation for us, and we are willing to continue this conversation to make sure that this carcinogen is better regulated here in the greater Sacramento Valley and other parts of the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking back to the room, if you'd like to make a comment, please step to the podium. At the podium, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is David Lai, and I'm commenting on behalf of California Life Sciences. CLS represents more than 1,300 companies across California's life sciences ecosystem, including medical technology innovators that develop and manufacture products that are used for everyday R&D labs, patient care centers, and even at homes. We're still reviewing the revised draft IUR proposal and intend to submit more detailed written comments before the close of the comment period. I don't want to repeat, but certainly echo the comments from my colleague, John Wenger. I want to maybe just add a couple things, though, on behalf of the importance of sterilization using ethylene oxide. You know, ETO is often the only viable sterilization modality available because products that depend upon that sterilization are heat or moisture sensitive, contain electronic components, have polymers that degrade under other modalities of sterilization. It's really an important aspect. It can, if alternatives can often cause damaged devices, compromise functionality, or fail to meet sterility requirements necessary to protect patient safety. So, you know, as people think about alternatives, we just want people to know that, you know, with respect to ethylene oxide, it is indeed the only alternative. We're concerned that adopting this revised draft ETO IUR will lead to potentially unworkable regulatory compliance thresholds, jeopardizing California's continued availability of sterilized medical devices and disrupting patient access to critical and ongoing care. We respectfully urge OEHHA to carefully consider these impacts and ensure that any revised IUR reflect a scientifically sound and balanced approach that protects both environmental health and patient access to safe, sterile medical technologies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Online, we have Gilbert Laura.
Good afternoon. Good evening, almost, everyone. My name is Gilbert Laura, representing Biocom. We are a life sciences organization representing pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, research institutions, and universities. Ethylene oxide remains essential for sterilizing medical devices where no viable alternative exists. As mentioned previously in the presentation, Any changes to the IUR will have real consequences for patients who depend on those products. We ask that the updated IUR be grounded in the best available peer-reviewed science with full transparency in the risk modeling methodology, and that OEHHA coordinate with EPA and FDA to ensure a coherent regulatory framework. We will be submitting more detailed public comment by the June 29th deadline. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll continue public comment. Looking to the room, if you'd like to make a comment, please step to the podium. To the folks attending virtually, please raise your hand. I will give it just a moment.
On Zoom, we have Barry Boyd.
Thank you. I was just speaking to make sure I was unmuted. My question is, as it's been stated that the ETO is the best use or the best product, for sterilization of medical products. Now, because I don't know, is that because it's the best in regards to cost versus profit ratio, or is it just simply the best? And if it is the best, as we've heard in the presentation, the amount of harm and ill effects that it is causing, then by all means, those producers and users of such product should come up with a way to use the product that will ensure 100% as close to 100% health and safety of those workers that are exposed to it. Cut and dry. If this product is the only product that is the best for sterilization, so be it. Then those again who produce it and purchase it for use come up with a way to ensure the health and safety of those workers that are actually exposed to it. Again, Barry Boyd, board member, a little heartburn here on my own problems. Air quality chair for the Sacramento Environmental Justice Coalition.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like
Thank you, community members, for showing up. Thank you, Germán, Barry, for your comments. Thank you, John, David, and Gilbert, for your comments, and we'll prepare a response throughout the public comment period. Thank you.
we did have an additional public comment. Mary Elizabeth, I saw your hand and I saw your hand go down. This would be an appropriate time if you had a comment on this agenda item. So I'll invite you to raise your hand if you'd like to comment. And okay, you should be unmuted on our end, Mary Elizabeth. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I just also, I hear about what the industry has to say and that it has been an effective chemical to sterilize equipment. And I think what we've gotten ourselves into is a mindset that recognizing the hazards and the dangers means that this is going to not be a viable option anymore. So I think we have to, strive always to look for ways to reduce environmental chemicals in the community and exposures to workers. And so, there's a lot of work that is needed for recycling, and a lot of that is hazardous. And so we have to, take on the mindset that personal protection engineering controls, minimization, those are everyday business as usual, rather than, some onerous regulation that, is meaningless, because we're talking about people's health and welfare, and particularly, workers that, may be tasked with sterilizing all day long. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking virtually, noting for the record, we have about 89 virtual attendees at this point, and looking to the room to see if we have anyone at the podium. Seeing no hands raised and no one at the podium, that concludes public comment on this item. We will now turn it over to our final presentation of the evening. I'd like to turn it over to CARB staff, who will walk us through CARB's overview of Acrolein and ETO, frequently asked questions, and next steps. CARB, I would invite you also to introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa Venasek, and I am the manager over the Toxics Inventory and Reporting Program at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. You'll also hear from my colleagues Annie Flores, manager of the Community Air Quality Program, and Bill Widger, Air Resource Engineer on my team. You just heard OEHHA explain the technical basis for the draft inhalation unit risk values for acrolein and ethylene oxide. Now we'll walk through the information CARB has shared in our online FAQ. We'll cover the draft risk levels for both pollutants, what we know about potential sources, what our monitoring data shows, the major information gaps, and the actions ahead. We want to highlight what CARB is working on now and where your input is most valuable. Our goal is to share what we know, be clear about what we're still learning, and explain how we're focusing our time and partnerships to better understand these chemicals and the risks they pose. We're coming to you early so that you can see what we know today and help shape key decisions moving forward. So starting with acrolein, I wanted to start off with noting that all of this material is available on our website under our Emerging Air Toxics page, where you can find both the long and short FAQs. You can access this at any time, and information will be updated continuously as we learn more. So what is acrolein? Acrolein is a harmful air pollutant that is a byproduct of incomplete combustion in diverse types of operations. Acrolein is designated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or U.S. EPA, as a hazardous air pollutant. Hazardous air pollutants are those pollutants that are known or suspected to cause cancer or other serious health effects. People exposed to these pollutants at sufficient concentrations and durations may have an increased chance of getting cancer or experiencing other serious health effects. These designations mean agencies already recognize acrolein as a pollutant that can cause harm to people's health for acute and chronic exposure. OEHHA's new draft IUR is specifically about long-term cancer risk. So what is the draft estimated cancer risk from acrolein in California? Using OEHHA's risk assessment guidance, their draft inhalation unit risk value, and annual average concentrations from CARB monitors, the estimated statewide excess cancer risk is about 1,300 in a million. In simple terms, if 1 million people were exposed continuously over a 70-year lifetime to today's average levels, roughly 1,300 additional cancer cases could occur on top of normal background rates. These numbers do not predict individual outcomes. Actual risk varies widely based on proximity to sources. Personal susceptibility and local conditions. This estimate is based on limited monitoring data with known uncertainties, which I'll touch on in a few slides. To put this into context, the estimated risk is more than 10 times higher than the cancer risk from benzene, and similar to the concern that drove California's major actions on diesel exhaust over 20 years ago. These excess cancer risk estimates don't reflect new risk. Acrolein and ethylene oxide.
Pause you just for a moment. For interpretation, can I have you slow down just a bit? Thank you.
Yeah. So these cancer risks estimates don't reflect new risk. Acrolein and ethylene oxide are already in the air. What's new is our improved ability to quantify that existing risk using updated science and better monitoring data. So how are you exposed to acrolein? People can be exposed to acrolein from many everyday sources, both outdoors and indoors. At high levels, it has a sharp, irritating smell, but at low levels, typically found outdoors, most people cannot smell it. Everyone is exposed to some amount of acrolein, mainly through inhalation, though skin and ingestion exposure can also occur. A large share of acrolein in the air comes from combustion. This includes smoke from wildfires and structural fires, residential wood burning, and an exhaust from cars, trucks, motorcycles, aircraft, recreational boats, and other off-road equipment. It is also present in tobacco smoke, including e-cigarettes. Acrolein comes from a wide range of everyday activities. As previously mentioned, many sources create acrolein when fuels don't burn completely. That includes engines and boilers at power plants, cement facilities, military bases, and utility operations. It also comes from trucks, planes, and other mobile equipment. Wildfire smoke, tobacco smoke, and e-cigarette vapor are all major contributors as well. Acrolein is also emitted during cooking and food processing. High heat methods like roasting and deep frying can release noticeable amounts, contributing to indoor levels of acrolein. Oil and gas operations may also contribute to acrolein. Acrolein can be used as a chemical treatment to kill bacteria that naturally occurs during oil and gas production, and small amounts can escape through venting when equipment corrodes. Acrolein can also enter the air from holding ponds where it's applied, as well as from on-site combustion sources. Beyond oil and gas, acrolein is also applied as a pesticide in irrigation canals and used in industrial water systems to control algae and plant growth. And finally, acrolein is tricky because it doesn't just come from direct emissions. It forms and breaks down quickly in the air through reactions with sunlight and other chemicals. So the levels we measure can come from multiple sources that aren't always easy to pinpoint. To help protect your health, avoid smoking tobacco, e-cigarettes, and other vaping products, and keep children away from smoke generated by these products. Avoid breathing smoke from fires and exhaust from diesel or gasoline vehicles and equipment. When cooking with oils or fats, avoid cooking at high temperature when possible and use a ducted range hood that vents to the outside every time you cook. As mentioned, wildfire smoke can be a source of acrolein along with other air pollutants. Reducing your exposure to wildfire smoke is always recommended. There are extensive resources to help families prepare for wildfire smoke and know what the air quality is when wildfire smoke is present so that you can limit exposure. Links to these resources can be found on CARB's FAQ website. In addition, use of air cleaners is an important best practice for reducing pollution exposures and health risks indoors, especially for sensitive individuals such as young children, seniors, and those with lung disease. To reduce particle pollution levels indoors, use a CARB-certified air cleaner with high-efficiency HEPA filtration. To also reduce levels of toxic gases, use air cleaning devices with specialized activated charcoal filters and metal oxide catalysts in addition to high-efficiency filtration. So a few slides ago, we shared draft cancer risk estimates. These reflect the best available science, and the data is clear. It points to a real concern. However, the monitoring data is limited and doesn't represent all of California, and the measurements themselves come with known uncertainties. Actual risk will vary by location, nearby sources, and local conditions. We also know many activities can emit acrolein, but we don't yet know how much each source contributes. CARB's past toxic inventory relied on older emission factors and chemical profiles that we now know are highly uncertain and were developed mainly for ozone modeling, not for air toxics. They also don't capture the full range of pollutants we would expect. Because of these limitations, CARB does not consider that inventory an accurate picture of acrolein emissions and is not presenting it today. Fully understanding the sources and the extent of this risk will require more study, and that work is underway. My colleague Bill will speak on more about that later. Now I'll turn it over to Annie to discuss ethylene oxide.
Thanks, Melissa. Again, my name is Annie Flores, and I'll be discussing the second toxic chemical today, which is ethylene oxide, or ETO. Like Acrolein, we created a frequently asked questions, or FAQ webpage, to help explain ETO and answer some common questions. The webpage includes the information I'll be discussing today, along with some additional information and resources. ETO is a gas commonly used to sterilize medical equipment and some food products. It is widely used because it kills bacteria and viruses at low temperatures for items that cannot be cleaned using steam or radiation. It is also used to make other chemicals that go into everyday products, such as plastics, textiles, and antifreeze. ETO has been recognized as a cancer-causing air pollutant. While it can also have short-term health effects, like headaches and breathing irritation, among other symptoms, the long-term exposure is the primary public health concern because ETO has been linked to an increased risk of several types of cancer, including breast cancer and white blood cell cancer. Newer studies suggest ETO may be harmful at lower concentrations than previously understood. That is why OEHHA is currently updating the health value for ETO using the latest available science and data. This does not necessarily mean ETO suddenly became more dangerous overnight. It just means scientists now have better tools and information to estimate health risks more accurately. ETO is not a new issue, as state and federal agencies have been working on it, studying it, and regulating ETO for nearly 40 years. In the 80s, ETO was identified as a harmful pollutant, and the first health values were developed. In the 90s, both California and the federal government adopted rules to reduce ETO emissions from sterilization facilities. California adopted an Air Toxic Control Measure, or ATCM, and the US EPA adopted a national emissions rule for sterilizers and fumigation facilities. Over time, as scientific understanding improved, these regulations became stricter. California updated its rules in the late 90s, and many local air districts added their own requirements for facilities using ETO. Another major update came in 2016 when the US EPA released a new risk assessment using updated scientific information. And more recently, some local and federal agencies have strengthened regulations in response. For example, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, where several large sterilizers are located, updated Rule 1405 to require stronger controls, monitoring, and emission reduction measures at sterilization facilities within their region. The US EPA also updated its national ETO rule in 2024. However, this year, the agency announced it is reconsidering some parts of those changes. Even so, facilities in California must still follow California state and local air quality rules. Based on OEHHA's updated draft health value and available monitoring data from 2 sites in Southern California, the estimated lifetime cancer risk associated with ETO is about 980 in 1 million. In simple terms, that means if 1 million people were exposed to those ETO levels continuously over a lifetime, which is generally considered about 70 years, about 980 additional cancer cases could occur above normal background cancer rates. It is also important to note that this estimate is based on limited monitoring data from only 2 locations in Southern California. ETO levels and potential risks may differ in other parts of the state. One reason why we're here today is because the estimated cancer risk is relatively high compared to some other well-known toxic air pollutants. The estimated risk from ETO is lower than Acrolein, but it is still substantial. It is about 70% of the level of concern associated with diesel exhaust many years ago when it first became a major public health issue. The estimated risk from ETO is also more than 10 times higher than that from benzene, which is another toxic chemical many people recognize. Again, these comparisons are meant to provide context and explain why agencies are prioritizing additional research, monitoring, and emission reduction efforts or ETO. One important thing to note is that most people cannot smell ETO at the levels typically found outdoors, so odor is not a reliable indicator of exposure. People can potentially be exposed to ETO in the air from several different sources, which I will discuss in a moment. Exposure may occur near facilities that use or produce ETO. It can also occur near storage or aeration areas where recently sterilized products may release residual ETO, or by being near other sources like tobacco smoke, fires, or internal combustion engines. How much exposure someone experiences depends on many things, including how close they are to a source, how long they are nearby, how well emissions are controlled from those sources, and local weather conditions. Research suggests that there are many possible sources contributing to ETO in the air. Known sources include large sterilization facilities and chemical manufacturing operations. Smaller facilities, such as hospitals, smaller scale sterilizers, or research and laboratory operations may also release ETO. Other sources include cigarette smoke, fires, and vehicle-related emissions. It can also be formed naturally and within the human body. It's important to note that ETO has been detected in rural and remote locations far from major facilities, which suggests there may still be important sources or atmospheric processes that scientists do not fully understand yet, or that it can travel long distances from larger emission sources. Researchers are currently studying if and how much ETO comes from those sources that are less understood, including biological processes and how it may form in the atmosphere through chemical reactions. The ways to reduce exposure to ETO are similar to general recommendations for reducing exposure to air pollution, and were mentioned earlier for Acrolein, so I'll go over these pretty briefly. Avoid smoking and vaping, keep children away from tobacco smoke, and limit exposure to smoke from fires and heavy vehicle exhaust when possible. During wildfire smoke events, resources from CARB's Smoke Ready California can help you understand local air quality conditions and ways to reduce exposure. Air cleaners may help improve air quality indoors. For gases like ETO, devices with activated carbon filters or other gas removal technologies may be more effective than standard particle filters alone, so please see our FAQ webpage to learn more. Although ETO has been an issue for a while and is still an important public health concern, some gaps and uncertainties remain that researchers are working to better understand, similar to Acrolein. Right now, the risk estimate is based on limited monitoring data, currently from only 2 South Coast sites, so more data are needed to understand ETO levels across California. ETO can be concerning at relatively low concentrations, and it can be difficult to measure ETO at those concentrations, depending on the method. Also, background concentrations are still a major question. As ETO has been detected far from known facilities, we need to understand whether that reflects additional sources, formation in the air, transport, or measurement limitations. Answering these questions through additional monitoring and research will help our agencies make better informed decisions about future risk reduction strategies. So now I will pass it over to Bill to discuss where we go from here.
Thank you, Annie. My name is Bill Widger, and to round out CARB's presentation, we're now going to shift from what we know about acrolein and ethylene oxide to what we do next with that information. And the big picture is that both pollutants raise similar planning questions and challenges. We need to improve the science, identify the sources that are contributing most to risk, communicate the risk clearly, and then determine which actions are effective, feasible, and enforceable. This last part of our presentation is about the bridge between the health values and practical next steps, so we'll briefly go over what the air districts are already doing, what CARB is already doing, what additional research and actions will be taken, and how the public can stay involved as this work moves forward. So for what the air districts are doing, they already use several tools to address air toxics, including regulatory programs, permitting, monitoring, and facility risk reduction requirements. Under the Air Toxics Hotspots program, districts evaluate potential health impacts from facilities and can require additional actions when risks are significant. District permitting programs can also be used to evaluate and limit toxic emissions from stationary sources. For Acrolein, districts already regulate several combustion-related sources that may contribute emissions, including engines, open burning, residential wood burning, and commercial cooking. For ethylene oxide, numerous districts have adopted local rules implementing CARB's statewide ethylene oxide control measure for sterilizers and aerators. As Annie mentioned earlier, South Coast AQMD has also taken additional action by recently amending Rule 1405. It's also advancing its understanding of ETO through its regional Multiple Air Toxics Exposure Study, otherwise called MATES. They are on their 6th version of this study, which newly includes ethylene oxide in this version, and public results are expected in the 2027 to 2028 timeframe. And similarly, CARB is also taking actions that reduce emissions from sources that may contribute to acrolein and ethylene oxide. For mobile sources, CARB's existing control programs reduce emissions from cars, trucks, off-road equipment, and freight sources. These programs reduce overall air pollution and can also reduce toxic pollutants associated with combustion. For ETO, as Annie mentioned previously, CARB already has an airborne toxic control measure for sterilization and aeration facilities. For sterilizer facilities subject to the most stringent requirements, the control measure can reduce ETO emissions up to 99%, depending on their processes and usage, and can reduce emissions from aerators by up to 95%. CARB is also working with districts, communities, and monitoring experts to improve our understanding of these pollutants in the air. For acrolein in particular, advanced monitoring technologies and mobile monitoring data may help us better understand how concentrations vary and which sources may be contributing. CARB has also expanded emissions reporting requirements for stationary sources through recent updates to our emissions reporting regulations. These regulations mean that more facilities will report information about toxic emissions. That will strengthen our understanding of potential sources. However, improved reporting still heavily relies on having consistent measurement methods, emission factors, and other scientific tools. CARB is also improving its understanding of emissions from fires, including wildfires, prescribed fires, and structure fires, and how smoke affects air quality. Finally, CARB is implementing programs that reduce smoke and fire impacts, including efforts to increase landscape resilience and reduce agricultural open burning through alternatives. Some of these actions will continue to reduce pollution now, while other efforts help build the information needed for more targeted future actions. So throughout this presentation, we have discussed important gaps in our understanding of the sources and exposure of both acrolein and ethylene oxide. We need better information about emissions, measurement methods, ambient concentrations, and which sources may be driving risk. To address those gaps, the governor's proposed budget includes $2.5 million in one-time funding for CARB and OEHHA to conduct targeted scientific research on these two pollutants. This research would help inform the foundation needed for future risk reduction actions. Better data will help us identify which sources matter most and what types of actions may be effective, feasible, and enforceable. As a note, this funding is currently being proposed by the governor and will require approval by the legislature. In addition to the proposed research program, CARB is developing a statewide plan for Acrolein and ETO. The purpose of the plan is to evaluate health risks, prioritize high-risk contributors, and establish a risk reduction strategy for these two pollutants. This plan will be informed by the planned targeted research program that we just discussed. It will also be informed by engagement with communities, state and local agency partners, air districts, and academic experts. The plan will need to consider not only the science, but also practical implementation questions. That includes technology readiness, regulatory authority, cost, permitting implications, and whether potential strategies are actually enforceable. The plan will also evaluate scientific gaps, including gaps in source testing and ambient monitoring, and identify the advancements needed to support future regulatory work and permitting. The statewide plan for acrolein and ethylene oxide fits into a broader effort here within CARB, the roadmap to reduce air toxics. The roadmap is the long-term strategy for how CARB can more effectively address toxic air pollutants statewide over the next 20 years and beyond. Acrolein and ETO are examples that demonstrate why a roadmap is needed. Emerging or newly quantified risks can surface faster than the existing program infrastructure can fully respond. That means that we need a stronger, more coordinated, and more forward-looking toxics program. The roadmap can help CARB identify which toxics pose the greatest health risks, where foundational data are weak, and what resources or program changes are needed to protect public health more effectively. The roadmap is expected to be presented to the CARB board at the end of 2026, and we encourage anyone who cares about the broader future of California's toxics program to follow that process and participate. For the last couple of slides here, we'll go over how to keep informed and how to get involved. To stay informed, there are steps that you can take. First, OEHHA's website has the draft materials for acrolein and ethylene oxide. That is where you can review the draft inhalation unit risk factor materials and submit formal written comments for the IUR during the public comment period. Questions today are welcome, but written comments for the draft IUR materials are especially important because they become part of the formal public process. Second, we encourage you to subscribe to CARB's Air Toxics listserv. That is the easiest way to get updates without having to track multiple agency web pages manually. CARB materials will continue to evolve as monitoring, research, and planning work move forward. The listserv is also where the public can hear about future opportunities to engage on the roadmap to reduce air toxics and the statewide plan. So the take-home message is that we do not have all the answers today, but we are committed to keeping the public informed as the science and policy work advances. This slide lists specific ways you can engage in the coming months. One option is to contact your legislator if you support the proposed research funding in the governor's proposal. You can also participate in the joint OEHHA and CARB workshops, such as this one, and thank you all again who have come here today, and also submit written comments for the draft IUR materials through OEHHA's public process. For the longer-term toxics program, you can participate in CARB's roadmap to reduce air toxics process. That effort is broader than acrolein and ethylene oxide, but these two pollutants are a good example of why the roadmap matters. You can also email CARB at airtoxics@arb.ca.gov with questions or comments. Finally, we also wanted to highlight that CARB expects to host a workshop in early 2027 to provide the public with updates on next steps for Acrolein and ETO. So today is not the last opportunity to participate. It is one step in a longer process. Thank you all for staying with us through a very technical topic. We know this is a lot of information, and we appreciate you taking the time to engage with it. With that being said, we're happy to take questions now. And if we're not able to fully answer a question today, or if your question is more detailed than we can address in this setting, we encourage you to follow up with us so that we can best address your questions. To close us out, the message we want to get across is that California is using updated science to better understand risk, fill the most important data gaps, and work with communities, air districts, and other partners to build science-based strategies to protect public health. And I'll turn it back to Jane for questions.
Thank you, Bill. We have some time left on the agenda right now for questions and also just comments on the CARB presentation. So we'll go ahead and invite you, if you're attending virtually, to raise your hand. And if you're here in the room, please step to the podium. Noting for the record, we do have about 80 virtual attendees at this point in the evening. I see some hands raised. I'll turn it over to Ronnie.
Neil Davenport. Neil, I've given you permission to talk, and you might need to unmute on your side. Yeah, we'll come back to you, Neil, in just a moment. I'm going to move on to Ermin Barahona. Oh. Armand?
Yes, hi. This is Herman Barahona with the Sacramento Environmental Justice Coalition. My question is, what has been done in the past to address ETO in the North Highlands 5-mile radius community? Is that a question you can answer today? I'm happy to take this offline as well. Thank you.
Would staff like to reply? Yeah, thank you. Yes, there is a statewide ATCM that's in place for ethylene oxide. And then we can also follow up with you on district-specific rules as well, unless Annie, you want to.
I do want to mention, yeah, I mean, we have our technology clearinghouse online, which has some of the district rules, so they can look that up on our website to see what the specific air district rules are. We can post a link to that in the chat.
Great, thank you. Neil, we're going to come back to you and see if you can offer a comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, great. Neil Davenport with Davenport Engineering. I may have missed the answer on a previous slide or two. Can you speak more to the overall timeline of when the risk factors might actually be published in some value such that state agencies would start to cite those in permitting and hotspots risk assessments? Are we're going to go through the research steps and other things over the next year or more before that would happen, or are we close to publishing new factors?
Yeah, so this is Rima Woods from OEHHA, and I'll start, and anyone from CARB would like to add on, please do. So for the inhalation unit risk factors for ethylene oxide and acrolein, we're currently in the public comment period, and what that means is we do have a draft document already available for review, and we're currently accepting comments. So what we will do is take the public comments that we receive and revise the draft documents as appropriate before taking it to the SRP, which is the Scientific Review Panel for Toxic Air Contaminants. So I mentioned really early in the presentation today that they're a panel of 9 experts that are appointed to do sort of an external expert peer review of our scientific documents. And then once they approve the draft, it can then be finalized and used by state agencies in risk assessments. The timeline for that can vary depending on the complexity of the document and the amount of time and the review process with the SRP. So we're anticipating completing this public comment period at the end of July, at which point we will then revise our draft document and hopefully take it to the SRP sometime later this year, possibly early next year. Once the SRP approves it, we're looking at, 3 to 6 months before it's actually implemented. And we'll keep you updated on the timeline as we move through the process because it is subject to change.
So but you have a process of research. Again, I work in this space. I don't want to sound unconstructive, but emphasis on uncertainty, knowing sources of these pollutants, technology readiness, I heard, costs. So somebody who boots on the ground deals with the modeling of toxic pollutants and knowing a lot's coming with any increase or addition of unit risk factors for these pollutants. It seems like what you're continuing to do should be considered before this other group goes forward to adopt anything. So it sounds like what you're saying is the two groups are independent, and these factors may be published for agency use before we fully learn what your research reveals. Is that fair?
This is Nicole Dolney with the California Air Resources Board. The draft values are available for air agencies to start to evaluate the implications to programs such as AB 2588 hotspots, as well as permitting. But as Rima mentioned, or Dr. Woods, sorry, those values will not be greenlit or ready to use officially until the SRP has approved, and then some implementation kind of timeline after that. We do recognize that the gaps in the science will pose some unique challenges to those programs as we implement the IUR. And that will be part of our consideration, especially in the statewide plan, and then our partnerships with the districts. We also have a question in the FAQ that speaks to this. The question is referred to as, how are air toxics programs impacted by the development of a new cancer IUR for Acrolein?
Chris Harper. It looks like your microphone's on mute. Or Charles Harper, it looks like your microphone is on mute, so you want to unmute yourself if you'd like to talk.
Sorry, my son was using homework on this Zoom, so that's Adam Harper with CalCIMA. I just wanted to ask some clarity questions. Just came across this item, and I'm trying to really understand some of the underlying. So thank you for this session this evening and the extensive time and reviews. Had a chance to start reading the acrolein cancer IUR. And I noticed that right in that, you noticed right up early that IARC concluded there was in 2021, IARC had concluded there was inadequate evidence in humans regarding the carcinogenicity of acrolein, knowing that the studies were either of poor quality regarding design of exposure assessment. And I think that's the reason you went to animal studies. And were all of the animal studies in your work also looked at by IARC when they didn't set a level? Is kind of one of the questions. In other words, right? Or did you come up with new data? It was very clear in the other presentation that you guys had kind of done a very new literature assessment and pulled a bunch of new studies in. It wasn't clear to me if you'd done that on acrolein. And then I heard a lot of comparisons to the old 1990 diesel numbers. And I was wondering, is that in real total values? Because it sounds like we're not sure on exposure yet. That's what CARB just told me. Or are you talking on the health risk rate of the unit risk itself, to try and understand that scope that you were trying to help us understand? Those are my questions. Thank you. And I really do appreciate this and just trying to understand what's going on here and how this will impact things.
Thank you. This is Meng Sang from OEHHA. I can try to answer the first part of your questions regarding evidence for acrolein in humans and animals. First, I'd like to clarify that IARC is an agency that only look at hazard, so they do not do risk assessment. That is, IARC does not do quantitative assessment. They don't come up with any health guidance levels. So in terms of evidence stream, in evaluating carcinogenicity, we always want to look at all the evidence streams from humans, animals, and mechanistic studies. So in the case of acrolein, there are about 10 human studies that OEHHA independently evaluated, and they are inadequate in deriving a IUR value. The animal studies we use are relevant models for human carcinogenicity evaluation. As a background, all chemicals that are human carcinogens are carcinogenic in animals when adequately tested. Many human carcinogens were first identified in animals, such as asbestos and formaldehyde. So we don't want to wait till adequate human studies are conducted because that can take a long time. We want to take action to assess acrolein now that we already have the animal data. The data OEHHA looked at in the animals were also evaluated by IARC. But again, IARC does not come up with values. So OEHHA's value is the first cancer guidance value on this chemical.
And this is Nicole Dolney again with the California Air Resources Board. I can address your question on the comparison to DPM. So acrolein risk is estimated using air monitoring information that CARB has. These come from about 11 monitors statewide. And while there are challenges with measuring acrolein that are discussed in our FAQ, we believe that the estimates of risk are reasonable and a good approximation based on what we know now for the level of risk. And that is on par with the level of risk of DPM back a couple decades ago when it was first identified. DPM risk was estimated a little differently. It's done with emission inventory data, which, as Melissa mentioned, we don't have good emission inventory data for acrolein. But using emission inventory data, air quality modeling, and then, of course, the IUR.
Thank you. And I would like to remind folks some of this information is in the FAQ posted on the CARB website also. See if there's any additional questions or comments on this portion of our agenda. And to remind folks, we are accepting public comment. The public comment period is open through July 29th. And you can submit public comment at the address on the website listed in today's agenda. It looks like we do have a hand raised virtually, so I'll come back to that.
Mr. Harper again.
Thank you. Just a really quick follow-up. Really appreciate the clarity. Sorry if it wasn't the fact and I hadn't got there yet. as a result of working on the animal studies early on, you indicated that because of that, there was an increased uncertainty factor. So am I incorrect in meaning that the health value becomes lower and more serious because the data source has more uncertainty going from animals to humans than if you had actually had human studies is to create a number from? Is that a correct understanding? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand here. Thank you.
I would say that any cancer dose response assessment comes with uncertainties, and we've evaluated uncertainties, and that's acceptable. That is meaning the animal studies for acrolein are adequate studies, and they're sensitive studies, and the uncertainty comes with it are addressed by the uncertainty factors by the interspecies scaling. So we do this cancer risk assessment and we accept the uncertainty. And the uncertainty exists with both animal studies and human studies.
Thank you. I'll pause just to see if we have any final questions or comments. And also offer a general public comment period at the end of the meeting now. If there was any comments related to the previous presentations of the evening, it looks like we do have one hand raised virtually, seeing about 71 virtual attendees, no one at the podium.
Armand?
Thank you, Herman Barahona, again with the Sacramento Environmental Justice Coalition. I just want to thank all of you for this meeting today. You have no idea how educational it is for us mortals on the ground. And we get to translate, interpret, and make this digestible for our folks in our churches and the nonprofits and our regular civic organizations. So I encourage OEHHA and CARB to continue connecting with grassroots organizations so we can have meaningful civic engagement and learning, really. Some of our folks that are coming out of universities are so excited about this kind of work that they're getting into this career track and also this education path. And so we're in the middle of creating a economic development conversation around that as well, because we want our communities to be able to become professionals in this field to address these public health concerns for the future. So thank you so much, and thank you for keeping us informed.
Thank you. On that note, seeing no hands raised and no one at the podium, I will turn it back to both OEHA and CARB if they'd like to make any closing comments.
Thank you everyone for attending today's workshop, for hanging out with us all the way until late in the evening. We appreciate your participation and your comments. Just as a reminder, the comment period will close on July 29th. And again, as a reminder, we're in the moment in the process where the IURs are a draft, and the decision-making point is when the scientific review panel meets again. So we'll make an effort and commitment to follow up with all of the attendees to make sure that you know when this meeting will occur. And with that note, we're very appreciative for your time, and you have our commitment to continue to educate and inform the public about these two chemicals. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to CARB. Any final comments? Thank you. And just a reminder for the CARB folks, the FAQ posted on the website should have additional information of what was covered this evening. On behalf of OEHA and CARB, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to staff. Thank you to everyone in the community that attended, whether in person or virtually. As it was said before, your participation matters. A final reminder, one more, written public comments are open through July 29th at oeha.ca.gov/comments. The time is now 6:49, and this concludes our public workshop on draft health guidance values for acrolein and ethylene oxide. Have a wonderful evening.